The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Why Science Can't Find God. Hey everybody, I jotted this down as a note. I was watching a discussion. I cannot remember if it was on one of the shows or on a TikTok live or something, where the apologist in question, when essentially cornered into demonstrating the problems between scientific understandings of the universe and whether or not there's a God, said that science is for the natural world, which is why it can't find God. And this prompted a lot of thought and a lot of questions for me, even though most of it is, they're things that I've thought about before and discussed before. But it's an interesting subject, which is the limitations of scientific discovery. And I'm going to get accused of scientism no matter how I phrase this. So go ahead, accuse me of scientism. I don't care. Until you come up with a better, more reliable way of knowing anything, I'm fine saying that, only science produces reliable knowledge beyond, direct experiential awareness of self, which we'll get to. But the question is, how does someone know that there is anything other than the natural world? As far as I can tell, the natural world is all there is. I haven't experienced anything beyond the natural world that I've been able to identify. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying there is nothing beyond the natural world. And by the way, science also doesn't make the proclamation that there's nothing beyond the natural world. Science doesn't depend on philosophical naturalism or philosophical materialism. Those two are functionally the same for discussions like this. Philosophical naturalism or materialism is the philosophical view that nothing but the natural world exists. I don't hold to that view. I don't know how that view could be sound. It is a claim that there's nothing supernatural, essentially. And I don't know how you prove that something that is ultimately unfalsifiable, untestable, doesn't exist. I think that's a mistake. What science relies on is methodological naturalism, which means that we're going to use as our methods to discover facts about things, methods which explore the natural world. It doesn't mean much beyond that. It's not making a declaration about what does or doesn't qualify for being part of the natural world. As far as science is concerned, everything that it can explore would be the natural world until that changes. And that seems like it may be a confusing cop-out for some people, but it's not. If something that were thought to be supernatural, some phenomenon or proposed phenomenon, were actually scientifically confirmed for what it is, would it then become part of the natural world? That's a question I've answered many times, and the answer is I don't have any idea. And neither, as far as I can tell, does anybody else, because it depends on what it is. If we find that we now have the ability to move beyond the bounds of the natural world, beyond, for example, space and time or whatever, and we identify something, it would depend on what we identified and what its relationship is to the rest of the natural world, because it could be that we've discovered something that people thought was supernatural, and it turns out that it has a natural explanation, and therefore our discovery places it firmly within the realms of the natural universe. It could also be the case, or at least we can't show that it's not the case, that we could come up with a methodology that would actually explore and test things that are beyond the natural world, beyond the limits of our local universe. And if that's the case, then science would then include disciplines that identify and verify that category of things. We can call it supernatural if you want, but beyond the boundaries of the natural world. So science isn't opposed to this. Science isn't a thinking thing. I mean, science is the label that we put on our pursuit of knowledge and the various methodologies that we use. But there's nothing about scientific discovery that says it can only deal with the natural world. It's just that methodological naturalism limits us to the natural world now because no one has ever demonstrated a methodology that will allow you to go beyond the natural world, which is why I asked at the beginning, if you think there's something beyond the natural world, how did you reach that conclusion? What data did you investigate? What methodology did you use to say there is something beyond the natural world? Now, there's philosophical arguments that try to propose that there's something that started it all, that exists outside of space-time, and because if the natural world's all it is, then the natural world can't be all it is, because something supernatural had to change the natural world to get it going. And those are all making assertions about the supernatural that can't be demonstrated and haven't been demonstrated. They are speculative at best. But the original claim was that science is for the natural world, which is why it can't find God. And the implication, of course, is that God isn't in the natural world. But could there be a science of the supernatural? I don't see why not. If the natural world, if it were defined as the local space-time presentation of our universe, and anything beyond that was somehow supernatural or super our natural, if that were to be the case, we have no idea if we're precluded from it forever from exploring that, or if we will find a methodology that allows us to explore it. How do we go about investigating the supernatural now? Well, we don't. What we investigate are claims that people attribute to the supernatural. Here's an observed phenomenon or a reported phenomenon, and those are mildly different. And it does not have a natural explanation, so people propose supernatural explanation. I saw a ghost. No, you are convinced that you had an experience that you are interpreting as seeing an apparition, which you are then describing in the best way you can as a ghost. But you didn't do any work to demonstrate that it is in fact a ghost. How do you tell the difference between a ghost and a prankster god and a fairy or a delusion or a misperception? I don't know. Well, I do know in some cases, but I don't know how people can claim that they've done that work and come to the conclusion that they experienced something supernatural. Science is about finding knowledge, all knowledge. There are areas in the world that we couldn't know about until we developed new tools to explore it. The microscopic and the gigantic. Until we had telescopes and microscopes, we were limited in what we could explore. We had to develop various mathematical systems to allow us to explore and understand things even better. The ancient and the future. We don't have time machines. And so we had to develop disciplines and the tools for those disciplines, because science is an inductive process that leads us to the best explanations. And we always are in a position where we revise those. Knowledge, all the knowledge gained from science, is tentative and subject to revision whenever there's better data. And we get better data by improving our tools, which comes from an understanding of the subject matter. It would have been very easy to claim that lightning is supernatural. It's thrown by the gods, and people did. But now we understand that it's part of the natural world. And do we fully understand everything about electricity and everything? No. But we understand enough, and we have models that produce consistently reliable results. If there's not a scientific method to get you the answer that you came up with, how on earth do you have confidence that you have the right answer? Like, my confidence that the Earth orbits the moon, or that the Earth orbits the sun and that the moon orbits the Earth, is based on observational data that each individual person can go out and investigate and try on their own, but also in reliance on scientific consensus for areas that I don't have personal experience with. And so I proportion my confidence to not just the data, but to my understanding of the data. It's the best anybody can do. And if you think that you've experienced something supernatural, but you don't have any method that can confirm that you did or confirm that it is in fact supernatural, how on earth did you reach that conclusion? If there's not a scientific method available to reach the conclusion, how did you reach it? Now, I'm not saying that science is the only way to know things. Obviously, I'm hungry. I know I'm hungry. I didn't have to use scientific methods in any strict sense to do it, although I did use basically a knowledge gathering tool. But I also know that it's not just direct experience. We know that it's a brain state because we now know what's inside our cranium and a little bit about how it works. And a brain state that is detectable and, like other things, deceivable. You can think you're hungry when you're not, and vice versa. All of your senses can be fooled, and your interpretations are impacted by your perceptions. I highly recommend spending some time going out and looking up specifically color optical illusions, where here's two things that look like two completely different versions of gray when they're actually the same. And what's happening is your brain is creating a model that makes that make sense. These two colors are the same, but they look different. These two colors are different, but they look the same. This is because our perception of color is influenced by all the things around it. And when we see flat images, which appear to be 3D, those are some of the ones that are particularly deceptive, we interpret what appears to be a shadow covering an area, and then our brain makes that seem lighter, like you just see it. It is so strong, this deception. And the reason it's strong is because everything you've ever seen is your brain telling you a story. All of your senses can be fooled, and the interpretation takes place in the brain. It interprets your senses in a way that makes sense. We're not stuck. It's not like there's no way to test for the actual color. We can, in fact, test for the actual color of any pixel in an image. We can test it to make sure that we're not wrong. And we find out we are, which is how we've created some wonderful optical illusions. Some of them are copyrighted, which is why I didn't go out and grab some to share, but you can just Google color optical illusion. You'll find a bunch of them. We rely on our senses, but we also know that our perception of them can be deceived, and our brain builds a model that makes sense to us. This is what science is particularly good at, making our internal model of reality as useful and accurate as possible. But the priority, sadly, may be on usefulness over accuracy. This deception that our senses can go through of auditory illusions, visual illusions, other sensory solutions, taste illusions. Our brain may favor a useful internal model over an accurate one, because the goal is to give us enough information about the world so that we are interacting with it in the way that allows us to live long enough to procreate, essentially. And in that case, if a deception that our brain creates, or a perception that our brain creates is less accurate but more useful, that's what we go with. And as a matter of fact, it's very difficult to get your brain to not do that. But the original sentence again, science is about the natural world, and that's why it can't find God. No. Science is about finding the truth. It doesn't make proclamations about truth, not capital T truth. I mean truth in the sense of defining models of reality that are as consistent as we can get. Maybe that's why it can't find God, because if something's not true, and there's no way to detect it, then it's not going to find it. But science is really about finding the knowable. And maybe you should stop claiming to know the unknowable or the unknown until you demonstrate a methodology that produces effective results. Rather than producing religious wars, countless denominations, and unparalleled confusion and disagreement, science can't find God because it addresses only those things that manifest in reality in a detectable, repeatable, verifiable way. So when somebody says that science can't find God or science can't find their God, what they're saying is that their God doesn't fit that description. Their God does not manifest in reality in a reliable, detectable, repeatable, verifiable way. And yet they're claiming that they believe it, that they have epistemic warrant to believe it, and that those of us who don't believe it are somehow delusional. If there's something that does not manifest in reality in a detectable fashion, then you're claiming to have detected the undetectable. If there's something that doesn't manifest in reality in a detectable way where you can reliably, repeatably, verifiably detect it, then what reason could you possibly have to believe it? You have no data, no consistent experiential reference to point to. You are saying that you believe something that you can't possibly have a good reason to believe. I don't know how you do that. I can't do it. And I'd say No one should. See you next time. Bye-bye.